The aliens thought humans were weak, and that was exactly what Jake Morrison wanted them to think. For 50 years, the human captain had sat in the big council room on Nexus Prime and watched the other species make all the important decisions while treating Earth like a small annoying child that needed constant supervision. The Krex warriors with their red scales and sharp teeth would bang their fists on the metal table and demand more territory for their empire, while the blue-skinned Zephyrians, with their glowing eyes, would whisper about their advanced technology, being too sophisticated for primitive human minds to understand. The ancient Vorthons, who looked like walking trees covered in silver bark, would simply nod their massive heads and assign humans to mine asteroids in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, where nothing important ever happened. Captain Morrison would bow his head respectfully and say, "Thank you very much for allowing humanity to serve the great galactic community, in whatever small way possible." The other council members would smile with their various alien features showing what they thought was kindness, but was really just barely hidden contempt for the newest and weakest species to join their exclusive club. After each meeting, Morrison would return to his simple-looking ship called the Horizon, which appeared to be nothing more than a basic transport vessel with weak engines and outdated weapon systems. He would send his reports back to Earth using what the aliens believed was primitive communication technology that took weeks to reach the human homeworld. His messages were always the same, saying that relations remained peaceful and that no alien species showed any hostile intentions toward humanity. What the aliens did not know was that every single word Morrison spoke in those council chambers was carefully planned, and every humble gesture was part of a deception that had been 50 years in the making. On the research station orbiting Kepler 7, Dr. Lisa Carter spent her days asking innocent questions about alien military capabilities, while pretending to study their cultures for peaceful scientific purposes. The Krex soldiers loved to boast about their plasma cannons that could melt through the strongest armor, while showing off holographic displays of their greatest battles, where they had conquered entire star systems in mere days. The Zephyrian technicians would demonstrate their energy shields with great pride, explaining how no known weapon could penetrate their advanced defensive barriers. The Vorthon strategists would share their battle formations that had remained undefeated for over 1,000 years, believing that humans were too simple to understand the complex mathematics involved. Dr. Carter would nod and take careful notes while asking follow-up questions that made her seem curious but harmless, like a child trying to understand adult conversations. What none of them realized was that every piece of information they shared was being recorded by hidden devices and transmitted instantly to Earth through quantum communication networks that existed far beyond their ability to detect back on Earth itself. General Paul Rodriguez oversaw what appeared to be a modest planetary defense system consisting of a few orbital platforms and patrol ships that barely registered on alien scanning equipment. When alien inspectors came to visit, they saw exactly what humanity wanted them to see, which was a collection of outdated weapons and defensive systems that posed no threat to anyone beyond Earth orbit. The general would apologize for the primitive nature of human technology, while explaining that Earth was doing its best to contribute to galactic security, despite limited resources and inferior engineering capabilities. The alien inspectors would file reports describing human military capabilities as negligible and recommending that Earth continue to focus on mining operations and agricultural support, rather than wasting resources on military development. What they never saw were the massive construction projects hidden inside hollowed-out asteroids, where human engineers worked around the clock building weapons that would make alien technology look like Stone Age tools. They never detected the underground factories on Mars where advanced materials were being developed that could withstand forces no alien scientist had ever imagined possible. They never found the secret shipyards in the outer solar system, where vessels of incredible power were being assembled using designs that incorporated the best ideas stolen from every major alien species and improved beyond recognition. They never suspected that every human mining colony was actually a disguised military base, and every agricultural world was secretly producing components for weapon systems of unimaginable destructive capability. The deception was perfect, because humans had learned the most important lesson in Galactic politics, which was that being underestimated was the greatest advantage any species could possess. While the Kreks spent their time conquering weaker civilizations, and the Zephyrians focused on showing off their technological superiority, and the Vorthons maintained their ancient traditions, humanity was quietly studying every aspect of alien society and preparing for the day when the mask would finally come off. General Rodriguez knew that day was coming soon, because the intelligence, reports from across the galaxy showed increasing alien aggression against species that could not defend themselves. The Trilony, with their beautiful crystal cities and peaceful nature, were already being threatened by Kreks expansion forces who wanted access to the quantum crystals that powered faster-than-light communication across the galaxy. Other innocent civilizations were facing similar pressures as the major alien powers grew more confident in their dominance and less concerned about hiding their brutal intentions from the supposedly weak human observers. President Laura Hayes had made the decision months ago that humanity would not stand by and watch genocide happen again. But the timing had to be perfect. The signal would come when alien aggression finally crossed the line from threats to actual mass murder. And when it did, every hidden human facility across the galaxy would receive the same three-word message: Protocol Revelation Execute. Those words would mark the end of 50 years of careful deception and the beginning of a new era where the galaxy would learn that the weakest-looking species was actually the strongest. Captain Morrison finished his latest report to Earth Command, knowing that it might be one of the last times he would have to pretend to be helpless. Dr. Carter packed away her research notes, knowing that her real work was about to begin. General Rodriguez looked out at the stars, knowing that soon the hidden fleet would emerge from the shadows to show the galaxy what real military power looked like. The aliens had spent 50 years believing they were the apex predators in a universe full of prey. They were about to discover that they had been living next to a sleeping giant that was finally ready to wake up. The massacre happened on a Tuesday morning when most of the galaxy was going about their normal business, without any idea that everything was about to change forever. Commander Beth Torres was conducting routine surveys in the Kepler system when her ship detected massive energy signatures coming from the neighboring Trelawney home system. The readings were all wrong because they showed the kind of weapons discharge that only happened during major military operations. But the Trelawney were known throughout the galaxy as the most peaceful species anyone had ever encountered. These ethereal beings communicated through patterns of light that danced across their translucent skin, and had never been involved in any conflict larger than a disagreement about which flowers to plant in their crystal gardens. Torres ordered her crew to move closer while keeping their ship hidden behind the sensor shadow of a large asteroid because something terrible was clearly happening, and Earth Command needed to know exactly what. What she found when they arrived made every human on the bridge feel sick to their stomachs. Admiral Thex Var of the Kreks Empire had brought 300 warships to demand immediate access to the quantum crystal, deposits that the Trelawney had discovered in their home system just 6 months earlier. The crystals were essential for maintaining faster-than-light communication networks across the galaxy, but they only formed in very specific conditions that made them incredibly rare and valuable. The Trelawney had politely requested time to study the environmental impact of large-scale mining operations because their entire civilization was built around living in harmony with their natural surroundings. They had offered to share the crystals with the galactic community, but wanted to make sure that extraction would not damage the delicate ecosystem that had taken millions of years to develop. Admiral Thex Var had responded by opening fire on the largest city without any warning or attempt at negotiation. The orbital bombardment was systematic and thorough, as Kreks heavy cruisers rained kinetic projectiles down on crystal spires that shattered like glass under the impact. 40 million Trelawney died in the first hour, as their beautiful cities were reduced to glittering fragments scattered across the planet's surface. The survivors who tried to flee into the underground cave systems were hunted down by Kreks ground forces who seemed to enjoy the terror they were causing. Commander Torres watched in horror as Kreks soldiers executed groups of Trelawney civilians who were trying to surrender by displaying surrender patterns with their natural bioluminescence. The aliens laughed as they harvested quantum crystals from the ruins of sacred groves where Trelawney families had worshipped for thousands of generations. Admiral Thex Var personally oversaw the execution of the Trelawney Council of Singers, who had been trying to negotiate a peaceful solution right up until the moment Krek soldiers shot them down in cold blood. The entire operation was being recorded by Taurus ship, using advanced sensors that the aliens believed were primitive scanning equipment, only capable of basic stellar cartography. Every moment of the massacre was captured in perfect detail and transmitted instantly to Earth through quantum relay networks that existed completely outside alien detection capabilities. The footage reached President Laura Hayes within 3 hours of the attack beginning, and she immediately convened an emergency session of the Human Colonial Administration. The conference room fell silent as the assembled leaders watched 40 million innocent beings die for the crime of wanting to protect their environment. Secretary of Defense Nicole Grant spoke first, saying that the Galactic Council would never take action against the Kreks because they were too afraid of their military power. Admiral Ryan Clark added that this was exactly the kind of atrocity that humanity had been preparing to prevent for the last 50 years. The president stood slowly and walked to the large window that looked out over the hidden military installations that honeycombed the landscape around the capital. She had known this day would come because the aliens had shown their true nature many times before, but never quite this blatantly. The Kreks had committed genocide against 7 different species over the past century, but always claimed they were acting in self-defense or responding to terrorist attacks. This time there could be no excuses because the Trilani had never hurt anyone, and their only crime was possessing something the Kreks wanted. President Hayes turned back to face the room and made the decision that would change galactic history forever. She authorized Admiral Clark to commence Operation Thunderclap, which was the code name for humanity, revealing its true military capabilities to the galaxy. The Admiral smiled grimly as he received the authorization codes that would activate every hidden human facility across known space. Within minutes, quantum transmitters that had been disguised as communication relays for decades began broadcasting the 3-word signal that would end 50 years of deception. Protocol revelation: execute. The message reached Captain Morrison on his diplomatic ship first, and he immediately changed course toward the Trilani system, while broadcasting a priority alert to every human vessel in the sector. Dr. Carter received the signal at her research station and began activating hidden weapon systems that had been built into what appeared to be a simple scientific facility. General Rodriguez got the message on Earth and smiled as massive hangar doors opened across the solar system to reveal the true size and power of the human fleet. Hidden shipyards that had been disguised as mining operations for decades suddenly came online as thousands of vessels that had been waiting in standby mode powered up their engines. The sleeping giant was finally waking up, and the galaxy was about to discover that they had been sharing space with a civilization that could destroy them all. Commander Torres continued recording everything as Krek's forces celebrated their victory over the defenseless Trilani, while having no idea that human ships were already moving toward their position. Admiral Thex Var was about to learn that his easy victory over peaceful aliens had just triggered a response from the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. The Kreks had spent centuries believing that might made right, and that the strong could take whatever they wanted from the weak. They were about to discover that there was always someone stronger, and that humanity had been quietly building the power to make them pay for every atrocity they had ever committed. The massacre of the Trilani would be remembered as the last time any alien species committed genocide without consequences. The age of human intervention was about to begin, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The Kreks fleet was still celebrating their easy victory over the Trilani when sensors detected a single human vessel approaching their position. Admiral Thex Var looked at the tactical display with amusement because Captain Morrison diplomatic ship was transmitting standard approach codes as if this was just another peaceful meeting. The human had brought 11 other vessels with him, which was actually more ships than most aliens thought humanity possessed, but still laughably inadequate compared to the 300 Kreks warships that filled local space. Captain Morrison opened communications on all frequencies, and his voice carried across the star system with a calmness that seemed completely inappropriate given the circumstances. Announced that the Kreks had committed an act of genocide against the Trilani people and demanded immediate surrender or they would face consequences for their actions. Admiral Thex Var burst into laughter that echoed through his command center, because the idea of 12 human ships threatening 300 Kreks battlecruisers was so ridiculous, it seemed like a joke. The Krex commander responded by pointing out that he had overwhelming numerical superiority and suggesting that Morrison return to whatever diplomatic games humans usually played instead of interfering in military operations. Morrison's reply was simple and direct, as he stated that this was not a diplomatic game, but an act of war. The space around Trelane Prime suddenly exploded with light as reality itself seemed to bend and twist in ways that should have been impossible. What the Krex had thought was empty space began filling with human vessels that materialized from nowhere, as advanced cloaking technology that had been beyond alien detection capabilities was finally shut down. Not 12 ships but 1,200 appeared in perfect formation around the Krex fleet with designs that looked nothing like the primitive vessels aliens expected from humanity. Massive, dreadnoughts longer than the largest Krex battleships took position in the center of the formation, while sleek destroyers with angular profiles that seemed to cut through space itself moved to flank positions. In the middle of it all was a flagship that dwarfed everything else in the system, as the UHS Retribution revealed itself in all its terrifying glory. The kilometer-long vessel bristled with weapon systems that Krex sensors could not identify and emanated energy signatures that made their most advanced technology look like primitive tools. Admiral Thex Var stared at his tactical display in complete shock, because his intelligence networks had reported that humans possessed only basic space travel capabilities and minimal defensive systems. Every report from alien observers had described human technology as decades behind galactic standards and their military forces as barely capable of protecting their own solar system. The evidence before his eyes proved that 50 years of intelligence gathering had been completely wrong and that humanity had somehow hidden a fleet that rivaled the combined military might of every major alien civilization. Dr. Carter's voice came through on a wide broadcast channel as she revealed that her decades of innocent research had actually been an intelligence-gathering operation of unprecedented scope. She explained that every question she had asked about alien military capabilities and every demonstration she had witnessed had been carefully recorded and analyzed by human scientists. Every mining operation the aliens had dismissed as primitive resource gathering had actually been a cover for massive shipyard construction projects. Every agricultural colony they had ignored, as irrelevant, had been secretly producing advanced materials and components for weapon systems. Every time an alien had condescendingly explained why human technology was inferior, they had been unknowingly providing blueprints for humanity to improve upon. The first exchange of weapons fire lasted exactly 90 seconds and demonstrated the vast difference between perceived military strength and actual combat capability. Krex plasma cannons that had terrorized dozens of species across the galaxy fired at maximum power against human shield systems that should not have been able to exist. The energy beams that could melt through the strongest known armor materials splashed harmlessly against defensive barriers that seemed to absorb and redirect the attacks without any visible strain. Human railguns responded by firing projectiles at velocities approaching the speed of light that punched through Krex armor plating like it was made of paper. The kinetic impacts were so powerful that entire sections of Krex battleships simply ceased to exist as the projectiles passed through them and continued into space. Advanced human fighters that had been invisible to Krex sensors throughout the initial deployment swarmed through alien formations like clouds of deadly insects. The small craft moved with impossible grace and precision as they targeted specific systems on Krex vessels with surgical accuracy. In those 90 seconds, Admiral Thex Var lost 60 ships, including some of his most powerful battle cruisers, while the human fleet suffered no casualties whatsoever. The technological gap was so vast that it was like watching children with sticks try to fight trained soldiers with advanced weapons. Captain Morrison's voice cut through the chaos of battle as he offered one final warning for the Krex to surrender immediately, or face a demonstration of why humanity had remained hidden for so long. Admiral Thex Var realized that his entire understanding of galactic military power had been based on completely false information. The species he had dismissed as weak and primitive had been quietly building the most advanced war machine the galaxy had ever seen. His pride and the warrior culture of his people made surrender unthinkable even in the face of obvious technological superiority. The Krex had built their entire civilization on the belief that military might gave them the right to take whatever they wanted from weaker species, Admitting defeat to humans would mean acknowledging that everything they believed about strength and power was wrong. Admiral Thex Var made the decision that would doom his fleet as he ordered his remaining ships to continue fighting, despite the hopeless odds. The Kreks had spent centuries being the strongest military force in their region of space, and they could not accept that they had suddenly become the weakest. What followed would be remembered as the moment when humanity announced to the galaxy that the balance of power had shifted forever. The aliens who had thought they were apex predators were about to learn that they had been sharing space with something far more dangerous. The revelation was complete, and now came the demonstration of what human military technology could really do when the gloves finally came off. What happened next was not a battle in any traditional sense, but rather a systematic demonstration of the difference between alien military technology and human engineering capability. Commander Tony Rivera led the first wave of human fighters in a display of precision flying that left surviving Kreks pilots questioning everything they thought they knew about space combat. The human pilots moved their craft with impossible grace as neural interface technology allowed them to control their fighters with thought alone. Their reaction times were enhanced far beyond normal biological limits as cybernetic implants processed information and executed maneuvers faster than any natural pilot could achieve. Rivera fighters did not simply destroy their Kreks opponents but dismantled them with surgical precision by targeting specific systems to disable rather than obliterate. The Kreks pilots found themselves watching helplessly as their weapon systems shut down, followed by their engines, and then their life support, while their hulls remained intact. They were forced to witness their entire squadrons falling apart piece by piece in a demonstration of technical superiority that was more terrifying than simple destruction would have been. The human capital ships began showcasing technology that made the Galactic Council science archives look like primitive textbooks. The UHS Retribution fired its main weapon for the first time in actual combat as a focused gravitational pulse, created a miniature black hole that existed for exactly 0.3 of a second. The gravitational shockwave that rippled outward from the weapon impact tore through space itself as 12 Kreks battleships were crushed into points of infinite density before the effect dispersed. The alien vessels did not explode or burn but simply compressed into nothingness as their molecular structure was overwhelmed by forces that violated every known law of physics. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded the battleship Defiance as it demonstrated humanity mastery over energy manipulation at the quantum level. Her ship main cannon fired streams of coherent dark matter that passed through Kreks' energy shields as if they were not even there. The dark matter beams reconfigured the atomic structure of whatever they touched as Kreks' warships simply stopped existing when their matter was converted into harmless radiation. There were no explosions or debris fields because the targeted vessels were transformed at the molecular level into energy that dispersed across space. The most psychologically devastating part of the demonstration came from Colonel Frank Weber's Stealth Division as they revealed technology that aliens had believed was theoretically impossible. Human ships equipped with advanced cloaking systems materialized inside Kreks formations to fire point-blank salvos before vanishing again, faster than alien sensors could track. The Kreks crews began firing at empty space because they were convinced that invisible enemies surrounded them on all sides. Their own weapons fire began hitting friendly vessels, as paranoia and terror replaced tactical discipline in the alien ranks. The cloaked human ships would appear just long enough to disable key systems on multiple targets before disappearing again, like ghosts that existed between dimensions. Kreks commanders found themselves unable to coordinate their forces because they never knew where the next attack would come from, or which of their ships would be the next target. Admiral Thex Var watched his supposedly invincible fleet crumble under attacks that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. His tactical officers reported that human technology was operating on principles that their science could not explain or counter. The energy readings from human weapons did not match anything in the galactic database, and their defensive capabilities seemed to ignore the fundamental laws that governed all known shield systems. The Kreks had built their military doctrine around overwhelming firepower and brutal efficiency, but they were facing opponents who fought like they existed in a completely different universe. Every assumption about space combat that had served the aliens well for centuries was proving useless against human tactics and technology. The psychological impact was devastating, as Krek's warriors who had conquered dozens of species found themselves helpless against enemies they could barely detect. Admiral Thex Var realized that continuing the fight would only result in the complete annihilation of his forces, without inflicting any meaningful damage on the human fleet. His pride as a Krek's commander warred with his responsibility to preserve what remained of his ships and crews. The warrior culture of his people demanded that he fight to the death rather than surrender to any enemy, no matter how overwhelming their superiority. But watching his vessels being systematically disabled and destroyed by weapons that seemed to come from some advanced alien civilization made him question everything he believed about military strength. The humans were not just defeating his fleet, but doing it with a casual efficiency that suggested they were holding back their true capabilities. Captain Morrison's voice came through the communication channels again, as he offered one final chance for surrender before the demonstration moved to its next phase. He explained that what the Kreks had witnessed so far was merely a small sample of human military capability, and that continued resistance would force humanity to reveal weapons that would make the current display look gentle. Admiral Thex Var found himself faced with an impossible choice between the certain destruction of his remaining forces and the humiliation of surrendering to a species his people had always considered inferior. His decision would determine whether the Krek's empire continued to exist as a military power or join the growing list of civilizations that had learned too late about human strength. The demonstration had proven that humanity possessed technology beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, but the real test would be whether they also possessed the wisdom to use that power responsibly. The aliens were about to discover that the most dangerous aspect of human military capability was not their weapons, but their willingness to show mercy to enemies who had shown none to their victims. Admiral Thex Var made the decision that sealed his fate and changed the course of galactic history when he refused to surrender, and instead transmitted an emergency beacon that summoned every Krek's battle group in the Empire. His message was simple and desperate as he called for all available forces to converge on Krek's Prime, because humanity had revealed military capabilities that threatened the very existence of alien civilization. The response was immediate, as 3,000 Krek's warships, representing 5 centuries of conquest and military advancement, began arriving at their homeworld within hours. The assembled fleet stretched across space like a metal constellation as every major vessel in the Krek's armada took position in defensive formations around their most important planet. The alien commanders were confident that raw numbers would overwhelm whatever technological advantages humanity might possess, because no civilization could possibly have built enough ships to match their combined firepower. They were catastrophically wrong about human industrial capacity and strategic planning. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace 4 hours later defied every assumption the galaxy held about military logistics and manufacturing capability. 5,000 ships of completely unknown design filled the void around Krek's Prime, as humanity revealed the true scope of their hidden military buildup. These were not the crude vessels that aliens expected, but works of engineering artistry that made the most advanced alien technology look like primitive tools. The ships moved with perfect coordination, as artificial intelligence networks allowed the entire fleet to function as a single massive organism. Admiral Susan Blake commanded the operation from the super dreadnought UHS Nemesis, which was larger than some space stations and bristled with weapons that existed beyond current galactic understanding. Her message was broadcast across the entire galaxy, through quantum relay networks ensuring that every species would witness what happened next. She announced that humanity had observed galactic affairs for 50 years and watched civilizations fall to aggression while the Galactic Council stood by in silence. The time for that silence had ended, and humanity would no longer allow the strong to prey upon the weak without consequences. The first phase of the battle showcased human technological superiority on a scale that made the previous demonstration look like a small skirmish. Krek's formations that had conquered star systems crumbled against human tactics that seemed to predict every move before it was made. The aliens' rigid military doctrines proved useless against opponents who fought with strategies that appeared to violate the basic principles of space warfare. Captain Dan Foster Experimental Squadron demonstrated humanity mastery over space-time itself as their ships folded space around them to appear in multiple locations. Simultaneously, the vessels fired from angles that violated three-dimensional physics as they existed in 11 dimensions at once. Krek's gunners found themselves shooting at targets that were somehow present and absent at the same time, while their own weapons fire passed through empty space. The second phase revealed that human strategic doctrine was fundamentally different from anything aliens had ever encountered. Rather than simply destroying the Krek's fleet, human forces began systematically capturing vessels and taking prisoners while reverse engineering alien technology in real time. The message was unmistakable as humanity demonstrated that they possessed not just superior weapons, but superior intelligence and strategic thinking. Every Krek's tactical manual and battle plan seemed to have been studied and countered before the fighting even began. Colonel Amy Torres led the assault on Krek's prime orbital defenses, as her Marines equipped with power armor that made them nearly invulnerable, carved through alien military installations, but they did not target civilians or bombard cities as the Kreks had done to the Trilani. Instead, they surgically removed military threats while leaving the civilian population completely unharmed. The precision was terrifying because it showed that humans could destroy anything they chose while protecting anything they valued. The final phase was pure psychological warfare, as Admiral Blake ordered her fleet to perform what would become known as the Great Demonstration. 5,000 human ships arranged themselves in perfect geometric patterns around Krek's prime, as their engines created light displays visible from the planet's surface. Then in perfect unison, they powered down their weapons and shields, while maintaining position in a show of confidence that left the aliens speechless. Admiral Blake broadcast her final message to Admiral Thex Var, explaining that humanity had demonstrated the ability to destroy the Krek's fleet at will, but chose not to. She offered surrender terms that included mercy for all Krek's personnel and protection for their civilian population, despite the genocide they had committed against the Trilani. The surrender came not from Admiral Thex Var, but from the Kreks Planetary Council, who removed their own military leadership and formally submitted to human authority. The silence that followed echoed across the galaxy, as every major civilization suddenly realized that their understanding of galactic power structures had been completely wrong on Vorthan Prime. The ancient Confederacy ruling council met in emergency session as they grappled with the reality that their 1,000-year dominance was over. On Zephyria Central, technological specialists frantically analyzed combat recordings trying to understand how their supposedly advanced civilization had been surpassed so completely. The Galactic Council convened with every member species present for the first time in decades as the chamber that had buzzed with confident chatter for generations fell tomb quiet. Captain Morrison addressed the assembly using formal protocols for the first time in human history as he requested a revision of humanity's status within the galactic government. The vote was unanimous, as humanity was granted full council membership, permanent Security Council seats, and authority over military operations in 3 galactic sectors. But the real change was not political, but philosophical, as the galaxy witnessed something that had never happened before. For the first time in galactic history, the strongest military power had demonstrated restraint instead of conquest. Humanity could have enslaved every species in known space, but instead chose to protect them from each other. The age of human leadership had begun, and it was based on strength used in service of justice rather than domination. In her final report, Admiral Blake wrote the words that would become the motto of human space forces: "We are strong so that others may live in peace." The galaxy had spent 50 years underestimating humanity, and learning that lesson had cost them their independence. But they were about to discover that living under human protection was far better than the brutal chaos that had defined galactic politics for millennia. The silence continued as every species contemplated a future where genocide would have consequences, and the weak would be defended by those with the power to make a difference.